The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late August of 1882, and Ruth Daniels read it 3 times before her hands started shaking so badly she could no longer hold the paper steady. The bank had foreclosed on her farm, the 160 acres her father had died protecting, and she had exactly 7 days to vacate the property before the sheriff would remove her by force. She stood in the empty kitchen of the farmhouse where she had been born 22 years ago, the wooden floorboards worn smooth by generations of Daniels' feet, and wondered how everything had gone so terribly wrong in just 6 months. Her father had passed in February, crushed beneath a fallen tree during a winter storm. Her mother had followed him to the grave 3 weeks later, grief stealing the breath from her lungs until she simply stopped waking up. Ruth had tried to keep the farm running, had worked until her hands bled and her back screamed in protest, but a woman alone in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, could not do the work of 3 men. The cattle had wandered off through broken fences she could not mend quickly enough. The crops had withered in fields she could not irrigate alone. The bank had extended credit at first, sympathetic to her situation, but sympathy did not pay interest on loans, and now the reckoning had come. She walked through the house one final time, her footsteps echoing in rooms stripped bare of everything valuable. She had sold the furniture, the dishes, her mother's jewelry, everything that might bring a few dollars to buy food and keep the wolves at bay a little longer. It had not been enough. Nothing had been enough. The house felt like a corpse now, hollow and cold despite the summer heat that shimmered across the New Mexico landscape. Ruth stepped onto the front porch and looked out across the property that had been in her family since 1858, when her grandfather had claimed it and built the first rough cabin. The mountains rose in the distance, purple and massive against the bright blue sky. The Rio Grande ran along the western edge of the property, a silver thread of life in the desert country. Her father had loved this land with a fierce passion that transcended reason, and now she was losing it because she was not strong enough to hold it. She had nowhere to go. The few relatives she possessed lived back east in Missouri, and she had no money for train fare. The town of Truth or Consequences offered few opportunities for respectable work for a woman alone. She could perhaps find employment as a seamstress or a cook, but the wages would barely keep her fed, much less allow her to save anything for the future. The realization of her helplessness settled over her like a shroud. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her from her dark thoughts. A single rider approached from the north, moving at an easy pace that suggested someone comfortable in the saddle and in no particular hurry. As the figure drew closer, Ruth recognized the massive frame of Reed Gallagher, the mountain man who trapped and hunted in the high country above town. She had seen him perhaps 6 times in her life, always from a distance, and each time she had been struck by his sheer size. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad as an axe handle and arms thick with muscle earned through hard labor in unforgiving country. His dark hair hung past his collar, and a full beard covered the lower half of his face. He looked like something out of an old Norse saga, a warrior from a more primitive time. He reined in his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding, and touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "Miss Daniels," he said, his voice deep and rough as gravel. "I heard about your troubles. Wanted to see if there was anything I could do to help." Ruth felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. The idea that her failure had become common knowledge in town was humiliating, though she supposed she should have expected it. Truth or Consequences was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business. "That is kind of you, Mr. Gallagher, but I'm afraid the situation is beyond help. The bank has foreclosed. I have to be off the property by next Tuesday." Reed dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who spent most of his life on horseback. Up close, he was even more imposing than she remembered. His chest and arms strained against his shirt, and his hands looked strong enough to snap logs in half. Yet his eyes, pale blue beneath dark brows, held a gentleness that surprised her. "I know," he said quietly. "I went to the bank this morning, spoke with Mr. Henderson about the particulars." Ruth blinked in confusion. "I do not understand. Why would you speak with the banker about my affairs?" Reed pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "I have been up in the mountains most of the past 2 months, trapping beaver and hunting. Did not hear about your parents until I came down to sell my pelts last week. I'm sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man. He helped me once, years back when I first came to this territory, Gave me supplies when I needed them, would not take payment. Said I could pay him back someday when I was on my feet. I remember my father mentioning you, Ruth said slowly. He said you were an honest man, and that was high praise from him. Reed nodded, his expression serious. I owe your family a debt. When I heard about the foreclosure, I figured this was my chance to make things right. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. This is the deed to your farm. I bought it from the bank this morning, paid off the full amount of the loan plus all the accumulated interest and penalties. Ruth stared at him, unable to process his words. You, what? That's impossible. The bank said I owed nearly $3,000. That's a fortune. I have had good years trapping, Reed said with a shrug. Beaver pelts bring good money, and I do not spend much living up in the mountains. The money was just sitting in the bank doing nothing. Seemed right to use it for something that mattered. Ruth felt tears burning in her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She would not cry in front of this stranger, no matter how overwhelmed she felt. I cannot accept such charity, Mr. Gallagher. It would not be proper. I have no way to repay you. It is not charity, Reed said firmly. He held out the deed. And you do not owe me anything. Look at the name on the paper. With trembling hands, Ruth took the document and unfolded it. She read the words once, then twice, unable to believe what she was seeing. The deed listed the owner of the 160 acres as Ruth Daniels, sole proprietor. Her name alone, with no mention of Reed Gallagher anywhere on the legal document. I do not understand, she whispered. You bought the farm, but you put my name on the deed? This makes no sense. You own nothing if this is legally recorded. I recorded it this morning, Reed said. The land is yours, free and clear. No debt, no mortgage, no one who can take it from you. Ruth shook her head, confusion and gratitude and suspicion all warring inside her. Why would you do this? No man gives away such a sum for nothing. What is it you want from me? Reed's jaw tightened, and she saw something flash in his eyes that might have been hurt. I want nothing except to know that your father's debt to me is paid and that you have a home. I know what people will think, and I know you are probably thinking the same thing. But I give you my word as a man of honor that I expect nothing from you in return. No marriage, no, nothing else. The land is yours to do with as you please. If you want me to leave and never come back, I will respect that. But you will not lose your home. Not if I can prevent it. The sincerity in his voice broke through her defenses. Ruth felt the tears spill over, running hot down her cheeks. I do not know what to say. This is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me. I thought everything was lost. I thought I would have to leave this place and never come back. You do not have to leave, Reed said gently. The land is yours. Your father's legacy is secure. Ruth wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. How can I possibly thank you adequately? You have saved my life, Mr. Gallagher. Truly saved it. I would have been destitute without this farm. You can thank me by making this place thrive again, Reed said. Your father loved this land. Honor his memory by keeping it alive. He started to turn back to his horse, clearly intending to leave now that his mission was complete. Wait, Ruth called out before she could stop herself. Reed paused, looking back at her with a question in his eyes. She took a deep breath, making a decision that terrified and excited her in equal measure. The farm is mine, you said, to do with as I please. That's right, Reed confirmed. Then I would like to hire you, Ruth said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I need help getting this place back in order. The fences are broken, the irrigation ditches are clogged, the barn roof needs repairs. I can do some of the work, but not all of it. Not quickly enough. I cannot pay you much, but I can offer you room and board. The bunkhouse is still standing, and I can cook. I'm quite a good cook, actually. If you would be willing to stay and help me for a few weeks, just until I can get things stabilized, I would be tremendously grateful. Reed studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You do not owe me anything, Miss Daniels. You should not feel obligated to offer me work. I am not offering out of obligation, Ruth said, though that was only partly true. I'm offering because I genuinely need help, and because you clearly know how to survive in this country. You have skills I lack. This would be a business arrangement, nothing more. Unless you have other commitments that prevent you from accepting? I have no commitments, Reed said slowly. I usually head back to the mountains after I sell my pelts, but I could stay in the lowlands for a spell. Make sure you get settled properly." Relief flooded through Ruth. The idea of trying to restore the farm entirely alone had been overwhelming. Having help, especially from someone as capable as Reed clearly was, felt like a gift from heaven. "Then it is settled. You can move into the bunkhouse whenever you like. I'm afraid there's not much inside. I had to sell most of the furnishings." "I have my bedroll and supplies," Reed said. "That's all I need. When would you like me to start?" "Tomorrow morning," Ruth suggested. "That will give you time to settle your affairs in town." "I will be here at dawn," Reed promised. He mounted his horse in one smooth motion, his strength evident in the ease of the movement. "Thank you for the opportunity, Miss Daniels. I will work hard to earn my keep." He rode off before she could respond, leaving Ruth standing on the porch with the deed clutched in her hands. She looked down at the paper again, at her name written in official legal script, and felt a surge of emotion so powerful it made her knees weak. She had a home, she had a future, and she had a mysterious mountain man to thank for it all. That night, Ruth lay in her narrow bed in the upstairs room where she had slept since childhood and stared at the ceiling. The house no longer felt quite so empty, knowing that it was truly hers and could not be taken away. But her thoughts kept returning to Reed Gallagher, to the puzzle of a man who would spend a fortune to save a stranger without expecting anything in return. She had heard stories about mountain men, about their wildness and their distance from civilized society. Reed did not fit those stories. He had been polite, respectful, almost gentle despite his intimidating size. Yet there had been something in his eyes when he looked at her, something that made her pulse quicken in a way she did not entirely understand. She told herself firmly that whatever was between them was purely business. He had helped her out of a sense of honor, nothing more. She would not read romantic intentions into simple kindness. That way lay disappointment and heartbreak. She had seen too many women in town pin their hopes on men who did not share their feelings. Ruth was determined to be practical, to focus on rebuilding her farm and securing her future. There was no room in her life for foolish dreams about handsome mountain men with gentle eyes and bodies built for sin. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, her last thoughts were of broad shoulders and calloused hands, and she dreamed of someone strong enough to shoulder her burdens alongside her. Reed arrived exactly at dawn the next morning, riding in from town with a pack horse carrying his supplies. Ruth had risen early to prepare breakfast, and the smell of bacon and fresh biscuits filled the kitchen. She had put on her best work dress, then changed into an older one, then changed back, annoyed with herself for carrying what she wore. This was a business arrangement. Her appearance should not matter. But when Reed knocked on the door and she opened it to find him standing there with his hat in his hands and the rising sun at his back turning him into a dark silhouette haloed in gold, she was glad she had worn the better dress. "Good morning, Mr. Gallagher," she said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "Please come in. Breakfast is ready." "Good morning, Miss Daniels," Reed replied. He hesitated on the threshold. "Are you certain you want me in the house? I can eat in the bunkhouse if you would be more comfortable." "Nonsense," Ruth said briskly. "You are working for me. The least I can do is feed you properly. Besides, the bunkhouse has no stove. You would be eating cold food all the time." Reed nodded and stepped inside, ducking slightly to clear the doorframe. He looked around the sparse kitchen with its empty shelves and missing table. "I brought a few things from town," he said. "Flour, sugar, coffee, some canned goods. Figured you might be running low." Ruth felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment. "You did not need to do that. I have enough to get by." "Consider it payment for the meals," Reed said. He went back outside and returned with a crate full of supplies that must have cost at least $20. Ruth opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. She was running low on nearly everything, and pride would not fill an empty stomach. If Reed wanted to contribute food in exchange for her cooking, she would accept gracefully. They ate breakfast at the old workbench Reed dragged in from the barn to serve as a temporary table. The meal was simple but hearty, and Reed ate with the appetite of a man accustomed to hard physical labor. Ruth found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, studying the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt, the careful way he handled the delicate china cup that looked tiny in his large hands. "Nah. I thought we could start with the fences," Reed said as he finished his second helping of biscuits. "The boundary fences need the most work. Once those are secure, we can round up whatever cattle have stayed on the property and make sure they do not wander off again. Then we can tackle the irrigation system and get water flowing to the fields. If we work hard, we should have things in decent shape before winter comes." "That sounds like a solid plan," Ruth agreed. "I can help with the fence work. I'm not as strong as a man, but I can hold posts and hand you tools." Reed looked like he wanted to argue, but he just nodded. "Any help is appreciated. This is a big property for two people to manage." They worked through the morning in companionable silence, riding out to the northern boundary where the fence line had collapsed entirely. Reed did the heavy lifting, sinking new posts into the hard ground with a strength that seemed almost supernatural. Ruth watched muscles bunch and flex across his back and shoulders as he worked, sweat darkening his shirt despite the dry heat. She found herself mesmerized by the raw power in his body, by the easy way he handled tools and materials that would have strained two normal men. "You're staring," Reed said without looking up from his work. Ruth jerked her gaze away, mortified. "I apologize. I was just—" "You are very strong. I've never seen anyone work like you do." Reed straightened up, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Life in the mountains builds muscle. You haul everything on your back, chop your own wood, do everything by hand. Makes you strong or kills you, not much middle ground." "How long have you been living in the mountains?" Ruth asked, grateful for the change of subject. "About 8 years, Reed said. "I came west after the war. Did not have much taste for towns and people after what I saw. The mountains suited me. Still do mostly." "The war," Ruth repeated softly. "That must have been terrible." Reed's expression darkened. "It was. I enlisted when I was 16, lied about my age, thought it would be glorious and exciting. Learned real quick that war is just blood and death and waste. I survived, which is more than a lot of good men can say, but I left pieces of myself back there. The mountains help. The silence, the solitude. Makes it easier to forget." Ruth felt a surge of sympathy. "My father did not fight. He was too old and he had a family to care for. But he knew men who went. Some came back, some did not. I am glad you survived, Mr. Gallagher." "Call me Reed," he said. "We are going to be working together. Might as well skip the formalities." "Then you should call me Ruth," she replied. Something shifted between them in that moment, a subtle deepening of connection. They were no longer stranger and benefactor, but two people working toward a common goal. Ruth felt it in the way Reed smiled at her, a small quirk of his lips that transformed his stern face into something almost boyish. They worked until the sun was high and the heat became oppressive, then returned to the house for lunch. Ruth prepared cold meat sandwiches and lemonade, and they ate on the front porch, where a slight breeze provided relief from the temperature. Reed sat on the porch steps, his long legs stretched out in front of him, and Ruth perched on the railing where she could see both the property and her unexpected employee. "You have done a lot already today," Ruth observed. "At this rate, the fences will be finished in a week." "That is the plan," Reed agreed. "Once the fences are secure, we need to think about getting some cattle back on the property. You will need income to keep the place running. Cattle are the best bet in this country." "I sold most of the herd months ago to pay bills," Ruth admitted. "I only have about 10 head left, and they have scattered across the range. I am not even sure where they are." "We will find them," Reed assured her. "And then we can think about building the herd back up. I have some money saved. I could invest in some good breeding stock." Ruth shook her head firmly. "Absolutely not. You have already done far too much. I will not take any more of your money, Reed. If we are going to rebuild this place, it has to be on our own effort, not on your charity." Reed looked like he wanted to argue, but he respected her enough to let it drop. "Fair enough. Then we will work with what we have and build slowly. It will take longer, but it can be done." "I have time," Ruth said, "and now I have help. That makes all the difference." The afternoon was spent stringing wire between the posts Reed had set that morning. It was tedious work that left Ruth's hands blistered despite her gloves. Reed noticed her wincing and called a halt to the work earlier than planned. "Your hands need time to toughen up," he said. "No point in working yourself bloody the first day. We have plenty of time." That evening, Ruth prepared a proper supper of fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans she had purchased in town. Reed ate like a starving man, complimenting her cooking repeatedly. After the meal, he insisted on helping with the dishes despite her protests. "My mother raised me to be useful," he said as he dried plates with a dish towel that looked comically small in his massive hands. "She would box my ears if she knew I let you do all the work while I sat idle." "Tell me about your family," Ruth said as they worked side by side in the small kitchen. Reed was quiet for a long moment. "Not much to tell. My parents had a farm in Missouri. They both died of cholera in 1875, right after I came back from the war. I sold the farm and headed west. Have not been back since." "I'm sorry," Ruth said softly. "I know what it is like to lose your parents, the emptiness they leave behind." "It gets easier," Reed said. "Or maybe you just get used to carrying the weight. Either way, you learn to keep going." They finished the dishes in comfortable silence. When everything was clean and put away, Reed excused himself to the bunkhouse. Ruth watched from the kitchen window as he crossed the yard, his broad frame silhouetted against the darkening sky. She realized with a start that she was already dreading the day when he would leave, when the fences were fixed and the farm was stable, and he would return to his mountains and his solitary life. She told herself not to be foolish. Reed had made it clear he expected nothing from her, that his help was purely about repaying a debt to her father. She should not read anything more into his kindness, but as she lay in bed that night, she could not stop thinking about the way he had smiled at her on the porch, or the gentle way he had told her to stop work when he noticed her injured hands. There was something growing between them, fragile as a seedling, but undeniably present. Whether it would grow into something more or wither away, only time would tell. The days fell into a rhythm. Reed arrived at the house each morning for breakfast, and they would discuss the day's work over coffee and whatever meal Ruth had prepared. Then they would spend the day laboring together on the endless tasks required to restore the farm. Reed handled the heavy work while Ruth helped where she could and managed the household tasks. Evenings they spent together on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains and talking about everything and nothing. Ruth learned that Reed was 26 years old, 4 years her senior. He had taught himself to read during long mountain winters by candlelight, working through books he purchased or traded for. He loved poetry, which surprised her until he recited a few verses from memory, his deep voice giving the words a resonance that made her heart ache. He was thoughtful and intelligent, with a dry sense of humor that emerged when he felt comfortable. And he was kind, unfailingly kind, in ways both large and small. Reed learned that Ruth had never been more than 20 miles from truth or consequences. She had attended school through the 8th grade, unusual for a girl in the territory because her father had believed in education. She loved to read as well, though her collection of books had been sold along with everything else. She had never been courted seriously, though several young men in town had expressed interest over the years. Her father had been protective, and she had been particular. No one had ever seemed quite right. "What were you looking for?" Reed asked one evening as they sat on the porch steps sharing a jar of preserved peaches Ruth had found in the cellar. Ruth considered the question seriously. "Someone strong," she said finally. "Not just physically, though that matters in this country, but strong in character. Someone honest and kind who keeps his word. Someone who would see me as a partner, not just as a wife to cook and clean and bear children. I know that is probably too much to ask." "It is not too much," Reed said quietly. "You deserve someone who appreciates all of you, not just the parts that make his life easier." "What about you?" Ruth asked, turning the question back on him. "Have you never wanted to marry, to have a family?" Reed was silent for so long that Ruth thought he might not answer. "I wanted those things once," he said finally. "Before the war. There was a girl back home, Sarah. We had an understanding. But when I came back, I was different, broken in ways I could not explain. She tried to help, but I pushed her away. Eventually, she married someone else. Someone who could give her the life she deserved. I thought I would be alone forever. The mountains seemed like the right place for a man like me." "You are not broken," Ruth said with sudden fierce intensity. "You are one of the strongest, most capable men I have ever met. Whatever you went through, you survived it. That takes tremendous strength." Reed looked at her, and in his eyes she saw vulnerability and hope warring with old pain. "You do not know what I have done, the things I have seen, the lives I have taken." "You were a soldier," Ruth said. You did what you had to do to survive. That does not make you a bad man. It makes you a man who has suffered and endured. I think that is something to be proud of, not ashamed of." Reed reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "Thank you," he said simply. "I needed to hear that." They sat in silence, hands clasped, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Ruth felt her heart pounding in her chest. This was more than friendship, more than a business arrangement. Something deeper was forming between them, something that both excited and terrified her. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The fences were completed, the irrigation ditches cleared and flowing. Reed rounded up the scattered cattle and discovered several calves that had been born in the rangeland, increasing the herd to 16 head. It was not much, but it was a start. They repaired the barn roof and rebuilt the chicken coop, then purchased a dozen hens in town. The farm was coming back to life. Ruth found herself thinking about Reed constantly. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the sound of his laughter, rare but genuine. The careful way he handled fragile things as if afraid his strength might break them. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, with an expression she was almost afraid to interpret. One morning in late September, Ruth woke to find frost on the ground. Winter would be coming soon, and she realized with a jolt that she had never discussed how long Reed planned to stay. The work was mostly done. There was nothing keeping him here except his own choice. The thought of him leaving made her chest tighten with anxiety. She was preparing breakfast when Reed knocked on the door. He came in stamping his feet against the cold, his breath misting in the air. "Winter is coming early," he observed. "We should make sure the barn is properly sealed and that you have enough firewood laid in." "Reed," Ruth said before she could lose her nerve, "how much longer are you planning to stay?" He froze in the act of hanging up his coat. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," Ruth said quickly. "No, I do not. But I also do not want to keep you here if you need to go back to the mountains. You have done so much already, more than I could ever repay. If you need to leave, I will understand." Reed turned to face her fully. "What if I do not want to leave?" Ruth's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I mean that these past weeks have been the happiest I have been in years," Reed said. "I like the work. I like bringing this place back to life. But mostly, I like being around you. Ruth, I like talking to you in the evenings. I like hearing you laugh. I like the way you look at me like I'm a good man, like I'm someone worth knowing. If you want me to stay, I will stay. For as long as you will have me." Ruth felt tears prick her eyes. "I want you to stay. I want it very much. But Reed, I need to know what this is, what we are. Because it feels like more than just an employer and an employee. It feels like something else entirely." Reed crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides and took her hands in his. "It is something else," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Ruth, I think I have been falling in love with you since the first morning I sat at your table. I tried not to. I told myself I had no right, that you deserved better than a broken-down mountain man with more past than future. But I cannot help it. You are smart and strong and brave and beautiful, and I want to be with you. Not as your employee, but as your partner, as your husband, as if you will have me." Ruth stared up at him, her mind reeling. "You want to marry me?" "I want to marry you," Reed confirmed. "I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you on this land. I want to give you children and grow old with you, but only if that is what you want. I will not pressure you, Ruth. You do not owe me anything just because I bought back your farm. If you want me to stay as a hired hand and nothing more, I will respect that. But I needed you to know how I feel." Ruth felt a smile spreading across her face, wide and uncontrollable. "You absolute fool," she said, laughing through her tears. "Of course I want to marry you. I have been half in love with you for weeks now. I just did not think someone like you could want someone like me." Reed pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, pressing her face against his broad chest. His heart hammered beneath her ear, as rapid as her own. "How could I not want you?" he murmured into her hair. "You are everything I did not know I was looking for." He pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. Then he lowered his head and kissed her, gentle at first and then deeper as she responded. Ruth wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the pent-up longing of the past weeks. His beard was soft against her skin, his mouth warm and sure. She felt safe in his arms, cherished in a way she had never experienced before. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Reed rested his forehead against hers. "We will do this properly," he said. "I will court you the right way. We will have a proper wedding in the church with the whole town watching. I want everyone to know that you are choosing me, that this is not some arrangement born of obligation or gratitude." "I am choosing you," Ruth said firmly, "and I would marry you today if I could. But if you want to court me properly, I will wait, though I think we have been courting already in our own way." "Maybe so," Reed agreed with a smile. "But I still want to do it right. You deserve flowers and pretty words and all the things a woman should have when a man is trying to win her heart." "You already have my heart," Ruth said, "but I will not turn down flowers and pretty words." They spent the rest of the day working together with a new lightness, stealing kisses when the mood struck them and making plans for their future. Reed insisted on speaking to the pastor in town that afternoon, arranging for the marriage banns to be published. Ruth wrote a letter to her distant relatives in Missouri, informing them of her engagement. It felt surreal and wonderful, as if she had stepped into one of the romantic novels she used to sneak from the lending library as a girl. That evening, as they sat on the porch in their usual spot, Reed pulled a small box from his pocket. "This was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band with a small garnet set in the center. "I have been carrying it with me for years, never quite sure why I held on to it. I guess I was waiting for the right person. If you would like something fancier, we can go to the jeweler in town." "It is perfect," Ruth said, slipping the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had been made for her. "I will treasure it always." "I will get you a proper house ring too," Reed promised, "something to mark you as mine in front of the whole world." "I am already yours," Ruth said, "ring or no ring, but I will accept any gift you want to give me." The next weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Ruth sewed herself a wedding dress from fabric Reed purchased in town, white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Reed built them a proper bed frame and purchased a feather mattress along with new linens and quilts. He also bought back several pieces of furniture that had been sold from the house, tracking them down through town gossip and paying sometimes twice what they were worth. Slowly, the farmhouse began to look like a home again. The wedding was held on the first Sunday in October in the small church at the center of Truth or Consequences. Half the town turned out, curious about the mysterious mountain man who had saved the Daniels farm and won the heart of Ruth Daniels. Ruth walked down the aisle alone, her father not there to give her away, but she held her head high. Reed waited for her at the altar, looking uncomfortable in a new suit, but devastatingly handsome nonetheless. The ceremony was simple but moving. Reed's voice was steady as he spoke his vows, promising to love and cherish Ruth for all the days of his life. Ruth's voice trembled with emotion but never faltered. When the pastor pronounced them man and wife, Reed kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The reception was held at the farm, with tables set up in the yard and food contributed by neighbors. There was music and dancing and laughter. Ruth had never been happier in her life. She danced with her new husband beneath the autumn stars, her head against his chest, and knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. That night, they lay together in their marriage bed for the first time. Reed was gentle with her, patient and caring as he taught her the mysteries of physical love. Ruth had been nervous, but his tenderness eased her fears. She learned the geography of his body, the scars that told stories of his hard life, the strength tempered by remarkable gentleness. When they finally came together, it felt right and natural, a completion of the emotional bond they had already forged. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Ruth traced patterns on Reed's chest with her fingertips. "I never imagined I could be this happy," she confessed. 3 months ago, I thought my life was over. Now, I feel like it is just beginning." "We will have a good life," Reed promised. "It will not always be easy. This is hard country and farming is hard work, but we will face it together. You will never be alone again, Ruth. I swear that to you." "And you will never be alone either," Ruth said. "You spent too many years in those mountains by yourself. You deserve to have someone to come home to, someone who loves you." "I never thought I would find that," Reed admitted. "After Sarah, I thought that part of my life was over, Then I met you, and everything changed. You gave me hope again, Ruth. You gave me a reason to come down from the mountains and live in the world again." "We gave each other a second chance," Ruth said. "That is what love does. It heals old wounds and opens new possibilities." The first winter of their marriage was harsh, with heavy snows and bitter cold, but the farmhouse was warm and well stocked, and Ruth found that she did not mind being snowed in when she had Reed for company. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other or simply talking. Reed taught her to play chess using a set he carved from wood. Ruth taught him to bake bread, though he remained better at eating it than making it. They made love frequently, learning each other's bodies and preferences. Ruth discovered that she had a passionate nature she had never suspected. Reed was an attentive lover who delighted in her pleasure. They talked about having children, but agreed to wait until spring when the farm would require less constant attention. In February, Reed made a trip into the high country to check his trap lines. He was gone for 10 days, and Ruth missed him with an intensity that surprised her. When he returned, riding through a light snowfall with his pack horse laden with pelts, she ran out to meet him without even grabbing a coat. He dismounted and swept her into his arms, kissing her thoroughly despite the cold. "I missed you," he said against her mouth. "The mountains felt empty without you." "Then do not go back without me," Ruth said. "Next year we will go together. I want to see the places you love." "It is rough country," Reed warned. "Not easy traveling." "I'm a farm girl," Ruth reminded him. "I am tougher than I look." "That you are," Reed agreed with a smile. "That you are." Spring came early that year, with warm winds melting the snow and coaxing green shoots from the earth. Reed and Ruth plowed the fields and planted crops. They increased the herd by purchasing 5 bred heifers from a rancher who was moving east. The calves were born in late April, healthy and strong. The farm was thriving again, and so were its owners. In May, Ruth realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another month to be sure, then told Reed one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a whoop of joy and spun her around in his arms. "We are going to have a baby?" he asked, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby," Ruth confirmed, laughing at his excitement. "You are going to be a father, Reed Gallagher." "And you are going to be a mother," Reed said, setting her down gently as if she were made of glass. "We need to take care of you. No more heavy work. You need to rest." "I am pregnant, not ill," Ruth protested. "Women have been having babies and doing farm work for thousands of years. I will be fine." But Reed fussed over her anyway, insisting she take frequent breaks and refusing to let her do any heavy lifting. Ruth found his protectiveness endearing, even when it was excessive. She had never had anyone worry about her well-being with such intensity. It felt good to be cherished. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Ruth's belly swelled with their child, and Reed would place his large hands on her stomach to feel the baby kick. He talked to the baby constantly, telling stories and singing songs in his rumbling bass voice. Ruth would watch him with tears in her eyes, overcome by love for this man who had saved her farm and her heart. In December of 1883, Ruth went into labor on a cold winter night. Reed rode to town through the darkness to fetch the midwife, then paced the downstairs of the farmhouse while Ruth labored upstairs. The midwife assured him that everything was progressing normally, but Reed was beside himself with worry. He had never felt so helpless in his life. Just after dawn, his son was born. The midwife brought the baby downstairs wrapped in a blanket and placed him in Reed's arms. "You have a healthy boy," she announced, "and your wife is doing well. You can go up and see her in a few minutes." Reed looked down at the tiny face of his son and felt something shift inside his chest. The baby had Ruth's nose and his own dark hair. He was perfect, absolutely perfect. "Hello, little one," Reed whispered. "I am your father. I'm going to do everything I can to be a good one." He carried the baby upstairs where Ruth lay exhausted but radiant in their bed. "Look what we made," Reed said, placing the baby in her arms. "He is beautiful." "He has your strength already," Ruth said, smiling as the baby gripped her finger with surprising force. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names during the pregnancy, but never settled on one. "What about Robert?" Reed suggested. "After your father. He would have been proud to have a grandson carry his name." "Robert Gallagher," Ruth said, testing the name. "I like it. Robert Reed Gallagher after both his grandfathers. Robert Reed Gallagher it is, Reed agreed. He sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Ruth and the other supporting their son. We are a family now. A real family. We have been a family since the day we married, Ruth pointed out, but now we are a family of 3. It feels right. Robert was a healthy baby who grew quickly. Reed proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to walk with the baby when he fussed, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours simply holding his son and marveling at the miracle of him. Ruth watched her husband transform into a father and fell even more deeply in love with him. Life settled into a new rhythm with a baby in the house. The farm continued to prosper. Reed hired a young man from town to help with the heavy work, giving himself more time to spend with his family. Ruth balanced motherhood with running the household and somehow managed to do both with grace and efficiency. When Robert was 6 months old, Reed brought up a subject he had been thinking about for some time. "I want to officially adopt your father's name," he said one evening as they sat together watching the baby play on a blanket. "I know Gallagher is my family name, but Robert Daniels was the man who showed me kindness when I needed it most. He set all of this in motion by helping me years ago. I would like to honor his memory by taking his name as my own. What do you think?" Ruth was touched by the gesture. "I think my father would be honored. But are you sure? Your family name is important too." "My family is gone," Reed said simply. "You and Robert are my family now. The name Daniels has history on this land, roots that go back decades. I would be proud to carry it. We could all share the same surname, the Daniels family of truth or consequences." So Reed legally changed his name to Reed Daniels, filing the paperwork in the county courthouse. The townspeople thought it was unusual, but also romantic in its way. The mountain man who had saved the Daniels farm had now become a Daniels himself, completing the circle. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. Robert grew into a sturdy toddler and then a lively child. In 1886, Ruth gave birth to a daughter they named Emma. 2 years later, another daughter arrived, whom they named Sarah, after Reed's first love. Ruth insisted on the name, wanting Reed to honor that part of his past. The farm continued to thrive under their joint management. The cattle herd grew to over 100 head. The fields produced abundant crops. Reed built additions onto the house, adding more bedrooms for their growing family and a larger kitchen for Ruth. He also constructed a proper schoolhouse on the property, hiring a teacher from back east to educate not just their own children, but also the children of their ranch hands and neighbors. Reed never went back to live in the mountains, but he took his family on camping trips into the high country each summer. Ruth fell in love with the wild places Reed had called home for so many years, and the children grew up comfortable in both the civilized world of the farm and the untamed wilderness. Reed taught his son to hunt and fish, to track animals, and read the weather in the clouds. He taught his daughters the same skills, believing that all children should know how to survive in the country they called home. In 1892, Truth or Consequences was incorporated as an official town, and Reed was elected to the town council. He was reluctant at first, but Ruth encouraged him to accept the position. He had lived apart from society for so long, she argued, and now he had the opportunity to help shape the community where his children would grow up. Reed served with distinction, using his practical knowledge and fair-minded judgment to help the town navigate the challenges of growth and change. Ruth became involved in the community as well, helping to establish a lending library and organizing social events. She maintained her father's legacy of generosity, always willing to help a neighbor in need. The Daniels farm became known as a place where people could find assistance in hard times, just as Reed had once helped Ruth in hers. On their 10th anniversary, Reed surprised Ruth with a trip to Santa Fe. They left the children with a trusted neighbor and spent a week in the territorial capital, staying in a proper hotel and dining in restaurants. Reed bought Ruth a new wedding ring, a gold band with 3 small diamonds representing their 3 children. They attended the theater and walked through the plaza hand in hand like newlyweds. "Do you ever regret it?" Ruth asked one evening as they sat on the hotel balcony watching the sun set over the city. "Giving up the mountains, the solitary life you loved?" Reed pulled her close against his side. "Not for a single moment. The mountains were where I hid from the world and from myself. But you brought me back to life, Ruth. You and our children are the best thing that ever happened to me. I would not trade this life for anything." "I love you," Ruth said. "More now than the day we married, if that is possible. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You gave me back my home, my future, my hope. And then you gave me a family and a love I never imagined I could have." "We saved each other," Reed said. "That is what love does. It heals and transforms and makes us better than we were alone." They returned to the farm renewed and refreshed. Life continued its steady march forward. Robert grew into a young man much like his father, tall and strong and honorable. Emma proved to be an accomplished horsewoman who could outride most of the ranch hands. Little Sarah developed a talent for drawing and painting, capturing the beauty of the New Mexico landscape in her artwork. In 1897, Robert announced his intention to attend university in Colorado, studying agricultural science so he could return and help run the farm with modern techniques. Reed and Ruth were proud, though Ruth cried the day they put him on the train. Her baby was becoming a man. The turn of the century brought changes to New Mexico territory. The railroad expanded, bringing more settlers and more commerce. Truth or consequences grew from a small settlement into a proper town with paved streets and electric lights. Reed and Ruth watched the transformation with mixed feelings. They appreciated the progress, but mourned the loss of the wild frontier they had known in their youth. Their own transformation was more subtle but no less profound. Reed's hair turned silver at the temples, and his beard showed threads of white. Lines appeared around Ruth's eyes and mouth, marks of a life filled with laughter and hard work. But their love remained constant, the foundation upon which everything else was built. In 1905, Robert returned from university with a degree and a fiancée, a lovely young woman named Elizabeth from Denver. They married that summer in the same church where Reed and Ruth had exchanged vows 22 years earlier. Ruth cried again, but these were tears of joy. Her son had found the same kind of love she shared with Reed. Robert and Elizabeth built a house on the western section of the property, and soon Ruth was blessed with grandchildren. 2 boys arrived in quick succession, filling the farm with new energy and noise. Reed proved to be a doting grandfather, teaching his grandsons the same skills he had taught his own children. Emma married a local rancher in 1908, a good man who treated her as an equal partner. They settled on adjacent land, expanding the family's holdings. Sarah, the artistic one, moved to Santa Fe to pursue her painting, but returned home frequently, never quite able to stay away from the land where she had been raised. Reed and Ruth grew old together on the farm that had brought them together. They remained active well into their 60s, still working alongside their children and grandchildren. The original 160 acres had expanded to over 1,000 through careful purchases and wise management. The Daniels name was respected throughout New Mexico, synonymous with hard work, integrity, and generosity. One evening in the summer of 1912, Reed and Ruth sat on the porch of the farmhouse that had witnessed so much of their life together. They were both 76 years old now, slowed by age but still sharp in mind and devoted to each other. Their children and grandchildren were scattered across the property, carrying on the work and the legacy. "Do you remember the day we met?" Ruth asked, her hand clasped in Reed's weathered one. "When you rode up to this very porch and told me you had bought back my farm?" "I remember," Reed said. "You looked so lost and brave at the same time, standing there with that foreclosure notice in your hands. I knew right then that I was going to help you, even if I had to spend every cent I owned." "You did spend every cent you owned," Ruth pointed out with a smile. "And you put my name on the deed alone. I never understood that. You could have kept it in your own name, used it as leverage, but you gave it to me freely." "Because it was yours," Reed said simply. "It was your father's land, your legacy. I just wanted to make sure you did not lose it. I never imagined that helping you would lead to all of this." He gestured at the thriving farm, at the houses scattered across the property, at the children and grandchildren who carried their blood and their values. "You gave me more than land," Ruth said. "You gave me hope when I had none. You showed me what love could be. You built a life with me that exceeded my wildest dreams. I have been blessed beyond measure, Reed Daniels. And it all started with your kindness." "And your courage," Reed added. "You could have refused my help. You could have let pride keep you from accepting what you saw as charity. But you were brave enough to accept assistance and smart enough to see it for what it really was. What was it really? Ruth asked, though she thought she knew the answer. Love at first sight, Reed said with a gentle smile, though I did not recognize it at the time. I told myself I was just paying a debt to your father. But the truth is, I saw you standing on that porch, and something inside me woke up after years of sleeping. I knew you were important, even if I did not understand how important you would become. Ruth leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun set behind the mountains. Their love story had been played out against the harsh beauty of the New Mexico desert, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared struggle. They had faced drought and disease, financial hardship and personal loss. But through it all, they had faced it together, their love a constant source of strength and comfort. Promise me something, Ruth said quietly. Anything, Reed replied. Promise me that when I am gone, you will not retreat back into those mountains. Stay here with our family. Let them take care of you the way you took care of me all those years ago. Only if you make me the same promise, Reed said. Do not shut yourself away if I go first. Stay here, stay alive, keep living for our children and grandchildren. I promise, Ruth said, though I have no intention of either of us going anywhere for a long time yet. We have more life to live, Reed Daniels, more sunsets to watch and grandchildren to spoil. That we do, Reed agreed, that we do. They lived for another 8 years, defying the odds and the expectations of old age. Reed passed first in the spring of 1920, dying peacefully in his sleep with Ruth beside him. He was 84 years old, his body finally worn out by decades of hard labor and hard living. The entire community turned out for his funeral, testament to the impact he had made on everyone he encountered. Ruth stood dry-eyed through the ceremony, her grief too deep for tears. She had lost her partner, her best friend, the great love of her life. But she kept her promise. She did not withdraw or wither away. She stayed active on the farm, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She told stories about Reed, keeping his memory alive for the younger generations who had not known him as well. She maintained the traditions they had established together, the values they had instilled in their family. Ruth Daniels passed away in the winter of 1923, on a cold December night much like the one when her first child had been born. She was 87 years old. Her children found her in her bed, peaceful and still, a smile on her weathered face. On the nightstand beside her was the deed to the farm, the document that had changed her life so many years ago. She had kept it all these years, a reminder of the day a mountain man rode into her life and saved her in every way that mattered. They buried her beside Reed on a hillside overlooking the farm, with a view of the mountains and the river. The headstones were simple but elegant, bearing their names and the dates of their lives. But the true monument to their love was all around, in the thriving farm they had built together, in the children and grandchildren who carried their legacy forward, in the community they had helped to shape and grow. The story of how Reed Gallagher, who became Reed Daniels, had bought back the Daniels farm and put it in Ruth's name, alone became legend in Truth or Consequences. It was told and retold, a reminder that true love exists, that kindness matters, that one person's compassion can change another person's entire world. The farm remained in the Daniels family for generations, passed down from parent to child, always managed with the same combination of hard work and integrity that Reed and Ruth had exemplified. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun sets behind the mountains and the desert air cools, the descendants of Reed and Ruth Daniels sit on the porch of the old farmhouse and tell the story of how their family began. They speak of a young woman who lost everything and a mountain man who gave it all back and asked for nothing in return. They speak of love that grew from gratitude into something far deeper and more lasting. They speak of promises kept and sacrifices made, of two lives joined together in perfect partnership. It is a story of the American West in all its harsh beauty, a tale of survival and transformation set against a backdrop of desert and mountains. But more than that, it is a love story for the ages, proof that sometimes the greatest acts of love are also the simplest. Reed did not need to buy back Ruth's farm. He did not need to put her name on the deed alone, giving up all claim to the property. He did not need to stay and help her rebuild, to court her properly, to build a life with her in the harsh New Mexico territory. But he did all of those things because love compelled him to do so. And in doing them, he found the peace and purpose that had eluded him since the war. He found a home, not just in a place but in a person. He found redemption and renewal. He found everything he had been searching for in those lonely mountains. Ruth gave him just as much as he gave her. She gave him a reason to rejoin the world, to believe in himself again, to trust that he was worthy of love and happiness. She gave him children and a legacy. She gave him 38 years of partnership and devotion. She gave him a second chance at life. Their love story did not have the dramatic passion of Romeo and Juliet or the epic scope of Antony and Cleopatra. It was quieter than that, built day by day through shared meals and shared work, through conversations on the porch and nights in each other's arms. It was a love rooted in respect and nurtured through commitment. It was the kind of love that lasts, that weathers storms and grows stronger with time. The Daniels farm still stands today, a working ranch run by the 6th generation of the family. The original farmhouse has been preserved and expanded, a piece of living history. Visitors can see the porch where Reed and Ruth spent so many evenings together. They can walk the fields that the couple planted and tended. They can visit the small family cemetery where Reed and Ruth rest side by side, their long journey finally complete. And if you visit on the right kind of evening, when the light is golden and the air is soft, you might almost see them there on the porch. A tall, powerful man with silver hair and gentle eyes. A small, strong woman with laugh lines around her mouth and a lifetime of wisdom in her gaze, sitting together in companionable silence, hands clasped, watching the sunset over the land they loved and the life they built together. It is an ending, but also a beginning. Their story concluded, but their legacy lives on. In the land they preserved, in the children they raised, in the values they exemplified, in the example they set of what love can be when two people commit to building something together. Reed found Ruth's farm foreclosed and empty. He bought it back and put her name on the deed alone. It was an act of extraordinary generosity from a man who had every reason to be bitter and closed off from the world. But in giving Ruth her future back, he found his own. In saving her, he saved himself. And together, they built something beautiful and lasting in the wild, unforgiving landscape of the American West. Their love story is complete now, every chapter written, every promise fulfilled. Reed kept Ruth's farm safe. Ruth kept Reed's heart whole. And together, they proved that love, real love, is the most powerful force in the world. It can overcome loss and fear. It can transform broken people into whole ones. It can turn a foreclosed farm and two lonely people into a thriving legacy that echoes through generations. And that, in the end, is what love does. It creates, it builds, it endures. Reed and Ruth understood this truth and lived it every day of their lives together. Their story deserves to be remembered, to be told and retold, a reminder that even in the hardest times and the hardest places, love finds a way. Love always finds a way.